Have a wonderful holiday.
A safe journey and comfortable setting.
And Ron, thank you for this, and thank you for the review too. I greatly appreciate it.
See you next year.
Is everybody comfortable with the temperature? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. So today we'll conclude this series of 6 classes, 6 talks on the Anapanasati Sutta. It's very similar to the Satipatthana Sutta, the Sutta on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Remember, the theme of the Anapanasati Sutta is the Buddha using the example of senior monks who have developed, in the Buddha's words, the Heartwood of the Dhamma, meaning they've developed the Eightfold Path as the framework for their practice and their awakening. And then he describes their meditation practice, and he describes their integration of all the factors leading to awakening. And that leads to what I'll be talking about today and concluding the talk with. The Satipatthana Sutta first establishes the 4 foundations of mindfulness that we use in meditation, and you'll notice that in the new instructions, to be mindful first of the breath and the body, to unite the body and the mind into what's occurring. Then to notice the arising and passing away of feelings and thoughts. It's the first 3 foundations of mindfulness. And then finally, to notice in a dispassionate way the present quality of mind. And that means that no matter what quality of mind is present, to be at peace with it, because now we understand the true nature of impermanence, including, and most importantly, the impermanence of our own thoughts, feelings, and fabrications. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha describes different factors that lead to awakening, and he concludes that sutta with having developed the mindfulness that can now hold in mind the 4 noble truths to develop the Heartwood of the Dhamma. The Anapanasati Sutta is slightly different in that the Buddha mentions the 4 noble truths prior to the 7 factors of awakening that concludes this sutta. But if you remember the lead-in, I guess this was Tuesday, the classes, the lead-in to the 4 foundations of mindfulness is now these monks have established a well-concentrated mind. When the Buddha is saying being mindful of the breath in the body in and of itself, that's what he means. In meditation, we're only mindful of the breath in the body, despite what might be arising and passing away in our feelings and thoughts, so that we can fully develop and fully hold in mind the 4 noble truths. And he'll reference that here too again. So I touched on this a little bit on Thursday's class, but I just want to reiterate it because it puts this whole conclusion to the sutta in the right context. The Buddha's words, and how are the 4 foundations of mindfulness appropriately developed so as to bring the 7 factors of awakening to their culmination? The 7 factors of awakening are qualities of mind that we develop that support our own awakening. Whenever a monk remains focused on the body, the translation that I use, and most of the translations I use are from Thanissaro Bhikkhu, excellent understanding of the Pali and the overall intent of the Buddha's teachings. His words here, whenever a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, which is just a little bit too ambiguous to me. But of course, what in and of itself means, no embellishment, we're not adding anything to it, we're not analyzing it, it's just the breath in and of itself. So I substitute the words, free of distraction. Ardent, alert, and mindful while putting aside craving and distress with reference to the world. Their mindfulness is steady and continuous. That, we talked a little bit about this Tuesday night too. That one paragraph that's repeated throughout the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. Ardent, aware, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside craving and distress with reference to the world. And it means, and I could add the word with self-reference to the world. We are ardent, alert, and mindful without using the people and events of our lives as a reference to who we are. We're no longer clinging to those things to describe ourselves to ourselves. We are ardent, alert, and mindful of it. This is the essence of the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness. It's the whole point of right mindfulness. And that line, craving and distress, The second noble truth states that craving originates and clinging perpetuates distress, suffering, doesn't it? Through a well-focused meditation practice, it's able to hold in mind all 8 factors of the Eightfold Path as an integrated, meaning a holistic or holy practice. We're able to finally put aside the craving and distress with our own reference to the world. Do you understand that? How that one paragraph really describes what this whole thing is about. And it's all rooted in a meditation practice that first develops concentration. And that last line, steady and continuous mindfulness, is a quality of mind that is supported by the concentration developed through Shamatha-Vipassana meditation. Nearing the conclusion of this teaching, the Buddha is again emphasizing mindfulness of the in-breath and the out-breath to develop concentration in order to support the refined mindfulness necessary to direct the mind, to hold in mind the factors of awakening, the Heartwood of the Dhamma. Again, I am emphasizing, at least as much as the Buddha is emphasizing in these teachings, meditation is used to deepen concentration, to develop a calm and peaceful mind, to support awakening. In that way, meditation is not, in and of itself, the goal. It's simply a supportive practice of awakening. Of course, it's a singularly supportive. We can't do it without meditation. And we can have awakening experiences during meditation, but we shouldn't look to meditation to have anything else except mindfulness of the in-breath and the out-breath in and of itself. And in that way, it will support the entire Eightfold Path. Clear? I think so. Buddha continues. When mindfulness is steady and continuous, then mindfulness as a factor for awakening becomes directed. It becomes useful. When it's steady and continuous. When mindfulness is steady and continuous, it forms the foundation for the culmination of the development of the Heartwood of the Dhamma. Again, the goal isn't an ordinary mindfulness. And I use it, the mindfulness of when you're washing the dishes. It's a good idea. I think it's because of the book I read years ago that made mindfulness of washing the dishes the goal. It's good to be mindful of anything that we're doing. And even when we're doing something mundane as washing the dishes, we should be mindful that we should be present for washing the dishes. But being mindful of kitchen chores is not a path the Buddha taught towards awakening. So we can lose it by overemphasizing mundane activities and thinking that, well, this is Dhamma practice, when Dhamma practice is being mindful of the 8 factors of the Eightfold Path and incorporating that into everything we do. That's what integrated means. That's what a holistic application of the Eightfold Path is. No matter what we do, we're not so much mindful of washing the dishes. We're mindful of holding right view while we're washing the dishes. Clear? So in that way, profound right view, awakened right view is a view that, as the Buddha teaches, profoundly and penetratively understands the nature of dukkha. So even a mundane task is then seen as something not good or bad, not something to be averse to, but not something to make a Dhamma practice around. It's simply doing the dishes or paying the bills. I had a talk with someone yesterday who enjoys different aspects of their business but doesn't enjoy the business aspects, paying the bills and all that stuff, which is how I was in business, like most people. But to be present for that, for the things that are so ordinary that we don't even want to do them, is missing out on most of our lives. So it doesn't mean that we should be enamored with writing out some checks, paying the bills, or any of the other mundane things that we have to do, washing the dishes, walking the dog, anything else. But we're present for it because that's where our life is occurring. Why would we want to miss it through aversion? Because we think that we need to be doing something else, or we should be, or this might be beneath us, or whatever aversion that arises is a self-referential view. Do you see that? It's a reference to the world. It's a reference to washing the dishes, etc. I don't want to be doing this. Well, you should want to do it solely because it's what you're doing. It's the whole point of awakening. Awakening is gaining full human maturity. So we're not whining to ourselves when we're standing in front of the kitchen sink full of dirty dishes. We're just doing it because it's what we're doing. Or any other of the other mundane acts of human existence that we create aversion to. Let me read that paragraph again, and I'll go into the next. When mindfulness is steady and continuous, even when doing the dishes, then mindfulness as a factor for awakening becomes directed towards what we're doing in this moment. When mindfulness is steady and continuous, it forms the foundation for the culmination of the full development of the Eightfold Path. The words in the sutta are for the culmination of its development. Remaining mindful in this way, they examine. Now, remember the context. The Buddha is referring to these senior monks who have developed the Heartwood of the Dhamma. Remaining mindful in this way, they examine the quality of mindfulness with discernment, with right view. And again, it doesn't mean getting analytical. They're looking at this self-developed quality of mindfulness through right view, meaning an understanding of, now I can understand clearly the nature of suffering and my own contributions to dukkha, to confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing disappointing experiences. With discernment, they develop understanding of this quality of mindfulness. Discernment is another word here for wisdom, too. Wisdom meaning having that overarching right view. Excuse me. When one remains mindful in this way, examining and developing understanding of this quality of mindfulness with discernment, with wisdom, then mindfulness of certain qualities as a factor for awakening arises. What are those qualities?
Can you please read that one more time?
Certainly. When one remains mindful in this way, so that, even that's important, in this way, a very specific type of mindfulness that the Buddha has now described through this sutta and the Satipatthana Sutta and other suttas. When one remains mindful in this way, examining and developing understanding of this quality of mindfulness with discernment, again, emphasizing that it's a very specific type of mindfulness, with discernment, then mindfulness of certain qualities as a factor for awakening arises. The context here is the 7 factors of awakening. We're able to actually recognize that we have developed them, or we're using them as a way of directing our Dhamma practice towards developing these qualities of mindfulness. Is that clear?
If it's how I understand it, when my children were growing up and there was a task that they didn't want to do, I would tell them there's always more than one way to look at something. And if it's something that you don't like to do, well, just see how long it takes you to do it. And maybe it's not that long, and you can do it for that long. And, same thing with words. There's always more than one way to say something.
Yeah.
So the way I'm hearing this is that, take the example of the dishes. If you're doing the dishes, you're not just doing the dishes and it's an annoying task or something you don't feel like doing. You have just fed people. You are now seeing the plates that they've eaten from. The more plates, the more people you've been surrounded by, and how wonderful is that? And food is a celebration of togetherness, and so that's another way to look at doing the dishes.
Good.
So am I hearing that?
Yes, it's
okay.
Great discernment, Helen, with the kids and with the example of the dishes. That our life is in that, and so there's nothing in the Dhamma that the Dhamma, as we develop the Dhamma, we understand there's nothing to be averse to, simply because it's what's occurring. It doesn't mean that we approve of everything. Again, the difference between acceptance and approval. I accept it because it's where I am. And in a very wise and gentle way, it's where I am. And I want to be living my life. One of the great benefits of being an ex-addict and alcoholic is that...
Are there many great benefits?
There are, because it gives you... Well, I'll explain it. the essence of addiction, any type of addiction or compulsive behavior, is you engage in that behavior so that you can avoid living your life.
Yeah.
And that was at the bottom of every glass I ever drank, alcoholic glass. The quicker I can get to the bottom of that bottle, the quicker I can avoid what's occurring in my life. And that really is the essence. And if you think of that, that is the essence of self-referential or selfish thinking. And so as we develop awakening, now we can get past the practical metaphor of addiction and compulsive behavior. In order to live my life, I got to be there. And I got to be there in a way with open arms, meaning with full acceptance of what's occurring. Or my mind is going to be agitated. And that can be in any different way. It could be, right now I've had the most wonderful piece of chocolate cake, but I need more of it. So I'm no longer living my life now. I'm no longer enjoying the last bite. I'm into the next piece or the next cake or tomorrow when I can get back to the bakery. Instead of simply enjoying. Or what a great, again, practical metaphor. Enjoying doing the dishes because it's the culmination of this wonderful day I've just spent with family and friends.
And the water is warm and it's, not such a bad experience when you think about it.
And in the end, I got a cupboard full of clean dishes instead of a sink full of dirty. I mean, and even beyond that, I just lived my life for 15 minutes without the need for it to be any different. And I got the dishes done or anything else. It really is the point. And again, so the point of the Dhamma isn't to use kitchen chores as a path to enlightenment, but to frame kitchen chores within the Eightfold Path.
To show you that every moment is an opportunity.
Yes. And so if we substitute mundane mindfulness, and again, I'm not putting it down. It's good to be mindful of what we're doing. But if we substitute mundane mindfulness at the exclusion of developing completely the Eightfold Path, there's no path to awakening. We might de-stress our lives to some extent. In fact, John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness movement in general has shown that simply developing that type of mindfulness is useful and effective. But the overarching mindfulness that the Buddha taught, and in his own words, is a very specific type of mindfulness that then supports that overall mindfulness of our life as our life occurs. Okay, I better get going because I want to finish this today.
I have a question.
Please.
But to get to the overarching mindfulness of awakening that the Buddha is telling us, that incorporates the Eightfold Path. A step is to be mindful of doing the dishes.
Yes, yes. The reason why I'm hesitating is, yes, it's a step, but we shouldn't
get stuck there.
We shouldn't get stuck there. We shouldn't make that as the culmination.
Right.
Look how I just enjoyed washing the dishes. I'm awakened.
But you have to start somewhere.
Yes. What I would see it more as a development of the Dhamma, to use whatever you're doing, including washing the dishes, to practice mindfulness without losing sight that right mindfulness is fully developing and holding in mind the Eightfold Path, no matter what I'm doing. But yes, so in that way, we should be mindful of everything we're doing, no matter what it is. We should be present and do the best we can to be present without aversion. So the way that they're doing the dishes, being mindful of doing the dishes would then be useful, is to find that I really don't like what I'm doing, and remember that that's aversion. It's rooted in a wrong view of Four Noble Truths, and bring your mind back to simply what's occurring. It's not good or bad. It's simply what we're doing. It's simply, I'm here. And to understand that the view that it should be any different than it is rooted in craving and clinging. Okay. And that could be, so take that away from doing the dishes as something that we could become compulsive about because it's bringing us pleasure. It's just as important in that instance to remember that, wait a minute, what I'm doing is increasing craving. It's a distraction in my mind because I've now created an identity of this is what I need to be happy. Just like I need to avoid the dishes to be happy. it's good to be mindful that that's what's occurring, but the way it becomes useful is to see it from the point of view of right view. That I don't want to be creating more self-identities, more self-reference, simply because this is making me feel good. Clear?
It's very clear, but it takes a long time, I think, to sort of learn all of those precepts of the Eightfold Path. And so, you know, I can try to be present. I can be present for my life, but maybe I have to go through another class in January to really have the Eightfold Path be sort of congealed as part of my thinking.
Oh, yeah,
you know what I mean? It's a lot.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're going to do it again.
Okay.
The way to really integrate the Eightfold Path is to first start with an effective meditation practice that you're doing. And Eightfold Path is right effort, which is a reminder that, yes, we need to continue with a meditation practice, well-focused, and then we need to start incorporating the other factors of the Eightfold Path. We do that first intellectually. We just look at what they are, read about it. You know, there's a lot of articles on the website and in the book. And then we learn the overall context of the Dhamma, which is important, meaning dependent origination, the Four Noble Truths, what they really mean, to know how to apply these teachings. And then to just keep looking at it, keep exposing yourself by coming to, I mean, we are so fortunate, and I don't mean this to sound self-aggrandizing, because I don't mean it that way. We are so fortunate to have what's developed here in Frenchtown, a well-focused Sangha that stays within the framework of the Eightfold Path in the context of the Buddhist teachings, because it is in that way that we incorporate it into our lives. For most people, rather gradually. You know, we keep coming back to it. So
I think of it in the example of the washing the dishes. It's like that, and then from that example you pan out.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where you see how it fits into everything else.
Okay, I can, yeah. Okay.
it's not something, the Eightfold Path can't be memorized and then be effective.
Right.
But initially we memorize it, we become familiar with it. And then as our concentration increases, we're able to apply what we need experientially. It might be that a lot of people talk about right view seems to be their entry point into integrating this. So as you begin your Dhamma practice, you might find that you're gossiping again. And you remember, wait a minute, this is not something that is skillful to do, so let me stop doing it. That's integrating the Eightfold Path in a very practical way. You might find that you have aversion to your own dukkha until you remember, wait a minute, right view is a view that direct me towards understanding my contribution to dukkha. You might recognize that you're craving for something or clinging to something in this moment, and you'll remember, wait a minute, right intention is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. So let me start right now and practice restraint. I only have one piece of chocolate. Well, in my case, I'll have 2 pieces, but not 3. Let me practice restraint in this moment. That's how we do it. But we, of course, anything that we learn, we first learn intellectually. Again, getting back to the theme of this sutta, the Buddha is using the example of these senior monks as how to integrate the Eightfold Path. And then he's describing how they've done that and how it affects their meditation practice. Remember, the sutta begins with these senior monks teaching novices. And the Buddha talks about how effective they are in teaching because they've developed the Heartwood of the Dhamma. They first had to do it before they could become useful and skillful teachers. Same with all of us. I had lunch with Matt earlier this week, and one of the things that we talked about, we talk about it often, is how remarkable it is that as a Sangha, and really all 3 classes, are able to support each other in awakening and developing this because we are doing it ourselves. We're all having the experience, and then we can share it with each other in very practical ways. Just like the Buddha taught. I have a secret. Come and see for yourself.
If you ever come on one of the retreats, it's like an immersion, and you're surrounded by people on the Eightfold Path, and it really comes together. It becomes so easy.
Yeah, really, and that really is the purpose of retreat.
It'll be very valuable to you.
It allows us to live within the framework of the Eightfold Path in an environment that supports it. And our spring retreat is going to be based a lot on the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. I wanted to introduce it first before we actually had a retreat on it, but that will take up a lot of the retreat. The dates are up there, middle of May or something. I'll have the registration up maybe next week even for the retreat. So okay, let me get back to this. Just to go back, this is how right mindfulness is established as a factor or a quality of awakening. One who examines and comes to comprehension of mindfulness as a factor of awakening simply means we understand how important right mindfulness is in awakening. Then, with discernment, investigation of the Dhamma arises. We now have developed the right frame of reference to truly investigate the Dhamma, what you were just talking about. When investigation of the Dhamma arises in one who examines and comes to a comprehension of that quality with discernment, with wisdom, then investigation of the Dhamma arises as a factor for awakening and becomes aroused. So that doesn't mean that we have to get to a certain point before we can even begin. But as we start to, remember, he's referencing a group of senior monks that have developed the Heartwood of the Dhamma. Because of this process, because of developing right meditation and right mindfulness, true investigation of the Dhamma arises. And in this way, true development of the Dhamma is brought to its culmination. This is how investigation of the Dhamma is established as a factor for awakening. When one who examines and comes to a comprehension of investigation of the Dhamma arising as a factor for awakening, persevering effort arises. I mean, we now understand the singular benefits of the Dhamma. And so we have our Dhamma practice is reinvigorated or taken to another level of persevering effort, relating again to right effort, the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. When persevering effort arises in one who examines, analyzes, and comes to a comprehension of that quality with discernment, then persevering effort arises as a factor for awakening. Referring right back to the Eightfold Path, doesn't it? This is how persevering effort is established as a factor for a quality of awakening. When one whose persevering effort arises, joyful engagement, usually the word, the translated word was rapture, but that really is getting to be an archaic word and often taken out of context, especially here. Joyful engagement with the Dhamma arises. When joyful engagement with the Dhamma arises in one whose persistence is aroused, then joyful engagement with the Dhamma as a factor for awakening becomes aroused. And why shouldn't we be joyfully engaged? If we've developed enough understanding of what the Buddha's Dhamma is all about, it's about awakening, and it actually works. It's effective. Eureka! We finally found what we've really been looking for. I know when I finally realized that it was that eureka moment. I finally have found what I've been looking for. And that was after many years of practicing Buddhism until I got to this. So we should be joyfully engaged in this, shouldn't we? This is how joyful engagement with the Dhamma is established as a factor of awakening. When one is joyfully engaged with the Dhamma, and look at how this brings it all the way back to the four foundations of mindfulness, the initial experience of the breath in the body. When one is joyfully engaged with the Dhamma, the body grows calm and the mind grows calm, uniting the body and the mind. When the body and mind of a Dhamma practitioner is joyfully engaged with the Dhamma, then tranquility as a factor for awakening arises. So the initial tranquility that we developed when we first start meditation then becomes a quality of mind that supports our awakening. This is how tranquility is established as a factor or a quality of awakening. Again, this is the Buddha's bringing this full circle. Back from starting a meditation practice, deepening concentration, holding in mind all the other factors and concepts necessary for awakening. Remember all the lists that went through just in this sutta. Concluding with, when one who is tranquil, the mind and body calm, the mind develops concentration. So when we begin with the intent to engage in Shamatha-Vipassana meditation to deepen concentration, and then the Buddha uses this sutta to describe exactly how that's brought to culmination, how it develops. So concentration is the first intention for meditation, and at the same time, when practiced appropriately, it is the result. It's the purpose of meditation, to deepen concentration. No other reason. We're not meditating to have any type of experience, even though whatever arises is to be mindfully aware of and come back to the breath in the body in and of itself to deepen concentration. And that singular act then supports the integration of the entire Eightfold Path. I should say it supports the refined mindfulness necessary to integrate the entire Eightfold Path. I better keep going. This is how concentration is established as a quality of awakening. When one whose concentration is established, equanimity arises, a calm and peaceful mind that is unwavering. When equanimity arises, then equanimity as a factor for awakening arises. This is how equanimity is established as a factor of awakening, meaning as a product of awakening. I am awakened, I've gained full human maturity. There's nothing that takes away from my calm and peaceful mind. What we just talked about too, isn't it? Even when doing the dishes. Even when giving instructions to our kids. Our mind is, and wisdom pervades that quality of mind, doesn't it? We always know the right thing to say. Furthermore, one remains mindful of the quality of mind in reference to the Four Noble Truths, bringing it all the way back to the Buddha's very first teaching. The Buddha continues, using this mindfulness and the concentration we've developed through meditation, remain mindful of knowing that this is stress, meaning understanding the nature of dukkha and how it arises and passes away. First noble truth. Remain mindful that this is the origination of stress, meaning knowing that craving originates and clinging perpetuates stress. We know where it's coming from. So when we experience it, we now have a skillful reference to why I'm agitated. Because I want something to be different than it is. I want more of something or less of something. And I've created an identity, so now I'm clinging to it. Be mindful to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. As it relates to the third noble truth, be mindful that this is the cessation of stress, knowing that the path that leads to it, but also to know and be mindful of having the experience of the cessation of stress, of letting go of all views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And then as that mindfulness relates to this, is to be mindful that this is the Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of stress, to hold that in mind. Again, bringing it all the way back to the singular importance of being mindful of all 8 factors of the Eightfold Path. Clear instruction, isn't it? And like Becky says, there's a lot there to get back to that point. But it is very clear instruction that we develop concentration so that we can hold in mind the Eightfold Path. In this way, one remains mindful of the quality of mind in and of itself, free of distraction internally and externally. Another important line there. We're no longer referencing external objects to describe the quality of our life, and we're no longer using objectified feelings and thoughts internally to describe the quality of my life. One remains mindful of the phenomena of the origination of qualities of mind and their arising and passing away. There is the knowledge of the maintenance of qualities of mind and their recollection, independent of and not clinging to anything in the world, completely separated from using the world as a reference for who and what we are. Some of you may remember in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha says, if it's impermanent, how could it describe itself? And so if we're clinging ourselves to impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas, we're simply rooted in wrong views that can only continue ignorance of Four Noble Truths, can only contribute stress. Independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. This is how one remains mindful of the 7 factors of awakening in and of themselves, without adding anything to it, without analyzing them any further, without embellishing them in any way, or the Dhamma itself. Now, let me go back just one paragraph in the article. In this article, I included this from the Nagara Sutta because it's the Buddha describing his awakening. I came to direct knowledge of fabrications, direct knowledge of the origination of fabrications, direct knowledge of the cessation of fabrications, and direct knowledge of the Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of fabrications. You remember, dependent origination states that from ignorance of Four Noble Truths, fabrications arise, mental fabrications. Mental fabrications are assumptions that we make about ourselves in relation to the world that are themselves rooted in ignorance. The Buddha came to direct knowledge of these fabrications, meaning he came to direct knowledge of his own ignorance of Four Noble Truths. The Buddha continues in the Anapanasati Sutta. Now, if anyone develops these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner, for 7 years, one could expect either complete understanding here and now, or if there is any clinging and maintaining remaining, in this present life. So for the first 600 years I practiced modern Buddhism, I was always taught that awakening is really not possible anymore, and it takes endless eons, is how it was always presented to me. And that always left me pretty dissatisfied, but I went along with it because some very well-respected teachers and everybody else was saying the same thing. You know, just knowing, well, why am I really doing this? But, you know, self-referential, maybe I'll be different and I can awaken. I mean, that really is kind of the underlying hook to keep you going, isn't it? The Buddha is saying in this, and he says this in other suttas too, that if you do this practice right, the way I'm teaching it, you know, the way the Buddha teaches it, the way I'm teaching it too, I hope, that's in 7 years' time or very quickly thereafter, you will awaken. And then he says, let alone 7 years, if anyone develops these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for 6 or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 year, for 6 months or 3 months, for 1 month, for 2 weeks, for 7 days, one could expect either complete understanding here and now, or if there is any clinging and maintaining remaining, meaning maintaining wrong views, in this present life. Guaranteed. Pretty good guarantee. Friends, the Buddha continues, this is the direct path for the purification of all beings, for the cessation of sorrow and regret, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for establishing the right method of practice, and for complete unbinding. In other words, these four foundations of mindfulness. When one is mindful of the arising and passing away, this is the Buddha's concluding this most important sutta, again, with this singular instruction. When one is mindful of the arising and passing away of all internal and external phenomena, their mind and body united, their quality of mind established in concentration and equanimity, the development of four foundations of mindfulness brings the 7 factors of awakening to culmination. This is how the 4 foundations of mindfulness are appropriately developed so as to bring the 7 factors of awakening to their useful culmination. The Buddha continues, and how are the 7 factors of awakening appropriately developed so as to bring right understanding or right view and release from clinging to wrong or ignorant views to their culmination? When one develops mindfulness in this manner as a factor for awakening, mindfulness is established. That mindfulness is established on seclusion, established on dispassion, established on cessation, and established on relinquishment, letting go of all wrong views. They develop investigation of the Dhamma as a factor for awakening. That's how it's done, Becky. They develop persistence as a factor for awakening. They develop joyful engagement as a factor for awakening. They develop tranquility as a factor for awakening. They develop concentration as a factor for awakening. They develop equanimity as a factor for awakening. So if you want to, it's good to read this again to remind yourself that these are the factors that we're hoping to develop within our Dhamma practice because they support awakening. These 7 factors of awakening are dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, and dependent on cessation. These 7 factors of awakening, when fully developed, result in relinquishment of all views rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths. This is how the 7 factors for awakening are appropriately developed so as to bring right understanding or right view and release from clinging to ignorant views to their culmination. This is what the Buddha said. Gratified, the monks were delighted in his words. The end of the sutta. So there you have it. I hope you. I hope I've impressed on you the importance of this sutta and also the overarching context of the Buddha's Dhamma in order to know how to apply these very important suttas. I began our class on a Tuesday night 2 weeks ago with just explaining that in the Dhamma, there's some superior suttas. And it's superior only in the context that they need to be held in mind. The Paticca-Samuppada Sutta, the teaching on dependent origination, and then the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the 4 noble truths, and then the next 2 suttas the Buddha ever gave, the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, the teaching on the not self-characteristic, and the Adita-Pariyaya Sutta, the sutta on how we bring dukkha into our lives through passion for maintaining self-referential views, right? Those are the superior teachings, meaning that they then support understanding and proper application of inferior suttas. And I mean inferior only in the sense, not in the sense that they are not important, they're equally important, but they need the support of the superior suttas to understand the context. And then you can understand how to apply and integrate the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the proper experience of breath awareness, Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, to know how to do it. And it all comes back to being mindful of the breath in the body, the in-breath and the out-breath in and of itself, to deepen concentration, to then support the integration of the framework of the Eightfold Path as the path for awakening. Just to close it out. Any questions about today's talk, and we'll go around the room? Great. Anthony, good to see you.
I feel like every time I come here, it's like the first time again.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that.
You mean I haven't taught anything useful up till now?
I didn't mean by like how, I don't understand anything. I meant like how excited I feel.
Yeah. I feel that. I feel that way often.
It's like so important right now before we go see our families.
Yeah.
And thank you for saying that.
Words of wisdom.
So mindfulness is kind of like, it's the same thing as meditation in a way. It just opens you up to see your experience. The one thing I have to say though is that obviously mindfulness can incorporate the Pali Canon, because then the hospitals and the education people and the mental health people will just run for the hills. But it does have a moral fiber to it, because there is compassion training and there is gratitude training. So I think those are important parts of mindfulness. And when you were talking about like how it doesn't sink in for me, like if I'm gossiping, then I go, oh, that's not great speech. I just have a feeling. I feel uneasy about something I said, and so I think that there's more of a main line, like a direct main line for me into opening up that experience I wouldn't have felt before, and I wouldn't have recognized without the teachings and the meditation. So I think, like, I don't so much directly think that when something is stressful, when you're not, like, I think the way I look at it is it's so important not to reject the present moment, because when you do, you experience stress. Like, to me, I just mainline it right to the 4 noble truths. Any rejection of the present moment equals stress, no matter how you reject it.
Yeah. And it's helpful to understand why we're rejecting the present moment. because of
Yes.
views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. There's no doubt that most modern applications of mindfulness have been used to shine a focus on something that seems to be, at a very basic level, escape the human experience, such as ongoing and unwavering compassion. It's a natural state of human beings to want to be compassionate, unless there's something organically wrong with the way you think, and even that can change. But it's not something that is a permanent fixture in humanity, is it? So we need to create different strategies to try and develop it more and draw it out of our own being. And so there's no doubt that the modern mindfulness movement has been helpful in that way. But why do we need it in the first place? Because we're ignorant of Four Noble Truths. Because we create self-referential views that we feel we need to defend, and sometimes to the point of war, or at least one-on-one with war with each other.
Yeah,
so the Buddha recognized that 2,600 years ago when he first walked away from the palace grounds and saw the competitiveness and the aggressiveness in the town. And that's what set him off on what's going on here, and how can I develop an understanding of this? And is there a way to bring this whole thing? Remember in the Loka Sutta, the Buddha describes how the moments after his awakening, he looked out on the world and the world was aflame. That's what he's describing. The lack of compassion, the lack of honesty in the world around him. And how can we bring it to its culmination is through a very specific mindfulness. So, and then getting back to it's being mindful of being compassionate is often very helpful, but if it's lacking wisdom, it can be very, very hurtful. And so just to use as an example, the Christian Crusades or the modern jihad, the people that have engaged in those types of behavior believe that they were being compassionate.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be compassion because you're hurting someone.
Yes, but in their minds, that's the point that I'm making. You can have a very compassionate intention in your own mind, but lacking the wisdom of what's really occurring, and create great harm for people all around you. So we need more than just to be mindful of being compassionate. We need to understand at a very basic level, why do I need to generate compassion? Why isn't it not just a constant expression of my own wisdom of how things really are?
Yeah.
And in that way, and here's where the great freedom comes from awakening. The great freedom that comes from integrating the Eightfold Path is then I don't have to think about it. I know that moment by moment, because I know that I've gained the concentration and a refined mindfulness to know my mind well enough to know that it's not agitated anymore, that it's resting in equanimity. I know that I'm not harming myself or anyone else through my thoughts, words, or deeds. And that's where real calm comes from.
It's almost kind of unfortunate that I think it's because all of these different sects of Buddhism have evolved, and some have made it very extreme and religious. Yep. That's the reason why mindfulness can't incorporate more Buddhism, because people equate those other parts of Buddhism with the whole thing. You know, they don't just isolate it like you do and focus on the Pali Canon. Most people's notion is that it's a religion, and you can't preach religion to my children, or you can't, so it becomes an obstacle to incorporating more of it.
Yes, and ultimately, if it's a religion, which unfortunately it's become, then extreme views can justify anything. Look at what's happening in Burma. That's a completely Buddhist-controlled country, and the genocide is unbelievable and justified by their views, so-called Buddhist views. There's not a Buddhist in that country. Well, I shouldn't say that. The ideology certainly isn't Buddhist to allow for that, but yet they claim. And on a more subtle scale, but almost as hurtful, is the continuation of ignorance wrapped in Buddhist robes, modern Buddhist robes. And to me, that's very hurtful, because people that would, and using myself as an example, people that are honestly seeking understanding and think that they're going to find it in Buddhism are then led to believe that your understanding is eons and eons away, but keep going, you'll be all right. And it's okay to develop these other ideas. I won't say his name, but the reference will point to it probably. The leader of one of the most major schools of Buddhism just said that his form of Buddhism, and this is one that preaches that all forms of Buddhism are one thing, his form of Buddhism is completely separate and more advanced than every other form.
Oh, cool. That isn't
Well,
even
and,
evidence.
but I mean, this is, and he said that it is that way because it's based completely in logic. And there's nothing logical about that form. I practiced that form. I took my vows in that form of Buddhism. There's nothing really logical about it. But that is a saying of one of the world's foremost Buddhist teachers. And I have great respect, even though those words don't sound like it, for who he is and what he does, but not for what he teaches. And he's saying those things out of great compassion. And to me, he's leading millions of people towards continued ignorance. To me, there's nothing compassionate about that. There just isn't. This is going to sound like a really arrogant statement, but I don't mean it that way. I wish I came across, well, I'll say it this way. I wish I came across the Sutta Pitaka many, many years ago. I wish that was my first exposure to Buddhism, because then I wouldn't have to go through many, many years of continued ignorance thinking that I was practicing Buddhism when I really wasn't. And so again, that's kind of guided how I teach, I guess, to a strong way. I don't want to mislead anybody. I remember when I first started teaching meditation, 8 years ago or so now, I decided that if I'm going to do this, I can only teach what I know that an awakened human being taught. And that's why I only teach what I find in the Sutta Pitaka. And that changes everything, doesn't it? It gives us all something to focus on. And it's not based on conjecture. It's not based on what I think meditation practice should be like. It's based on what an awakened human being taught. My mind remains conflict-free about what I'm teaching because I'm pulling it out of what an awakened human being taught, not something that I developed, which is important. I think I got a little bit off of what you were talking about, Anthony, but thank you. Becky, good to see you.
Thank you. Very good to be here. Well, I really don't have a lot to say today. It's been another good class for me. I always feel when I sit down to meditate, I always just feel, I feel good. I feel calm. I feel a calm come over me that, and I hope that I'm not meditating, because I want that feeling again. And that's why I keep asking questions about, what I should be doing. But when I do meditate, I feel like I'm getting it. I'm doing what I should be doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's helping in my life. So, and I feel like I know myself a little bit better. And I feel like I should just say to you. I want to say what Anthony said, that I say things now, and afterwards I just feel bad.
Yep.
Because I said that, whereas I wouldn't have recognized that before. Never would have recognized it. And now, I usually always in those cases though stick in the second arrow, where it's like, when am I going to stop doing that?
Now.
But at least I recognize it, which I know is progress.
Oh, it's great progress. Thank you, Becky. Before we can
Yeah.
practice restraint, we have to recognize the need to practice restraint. There's an article on the website. It's mindfulness is recognition and renunciation. We first have to use that mindfulness to recognize what needs to be changed. And then we can.
I'm going to have a really good way of practicing all of that in about 4 days when I get out west.
Good opportunity.
It's going to be a real good opportunity.
Yeah, it's an
It
opportunity. That's right.
It is. And if you find yourself getting agitated, don't stick the second hour in. Just recognize that in this moment, I want something to be different than it is. Period. And be mindful of the in-breath and the out-breath. It's okay to look forward to meditation because we feel good during meditation. We have periods of calm and joy. That's a skillful motivation, and it's okay. To say that you shouldn't, I just wrote a response to something in Tricycle about how meditation is useless and we shouldn't do anything in it. It's so ridiculous. It's okay to feel good. It's important to recognize the benefits of meditation, just to not become attached to them. And you're not. You're just, and it would be an extreme view, an ascetic view, to say we shouldn't feel anything and shouldn't recognize the pleasurable benefits of meditation. It's kind of what keeps us going. Glad you're here this morning.
Just what worked well for me at Thanksgiving was bringing flowers for all the women. That just got me in for the whole holiday.
That's always a good idea.
It actually really worked out well.
That's nice.
Right intention.
Thank you, Anthony. Helen, good to see you this morning.
Thank you. Good to be here. I'm fully aware of the second arrow going in, and I've experienced that too. And I really appreciate that sutta. So my tactic now is, if I ever catch myself doing something I wish I hadn't, said I'm saying something, moving in a direction, I put a smile on my face. Like, okay, I caught that, because you can get your body to follow your head. And so if my head is smiling, then my body's going to release that tendency to stab with the other arrow.
Yes.
And also you can smile because you're like, I'm getting it. I can do this. So that's my technique. Whenever I catch myself falling off the path or straying from the path, I smile and it turns everything around. It's my trick.
Thank you. I used to give the instruction in beginning meditation to put a smile on your face. This is a wonderful thing we're doing. Maybe I'll incorporate it. I think there's enough in the instruction. Thank you, Helen. Liz, good to see you.
Oh, good to see you too. It's good to be here. I'm still challenged by those moments where, and everyone can make a comparison when you're with family, that there are moments when you just want things to be different than what they are. And is a first line, because see, I go into self-defense when that happens, and oftentimes kind of work my way away from whatever the element is. Say it's talking politics or whatever, but for my own sanity, I can literally walk away. So when you don't want things to be what they are, it's okay to walk away, right?
Yep.
I mean, you don't have to stand there and be tested, for half an hour.
Absolutely not.
The art of war is not to fight.
Because all the skills are there. We've all been coming long enough that we know that if we start, these feelings arise, there's a skillful use of the Dhamma in that moment.
Yep.
So there is no skillful walking away, Eightfold Path, element to it, but
It's called skipping.
yeah, I mean,
Well, in that sense, it's
like
restraint.
noble silence. Yeah, noble silence.
Yeah.
But noble silence, it's a really good time to go and do the dishes.
Yeah.
So
Thank
that's
you.
where I'll be.
I'm trying to practice noble silence so hard that I have to walk away.
I never thought we'd get to the point where we've established that doing the dishes is a true refuge, a fourth refuge.
Yes.
There you go. That's, okay, I'm gonna keep that.
Refuge in the dishes.
So when the Buddha,
Drama, the dishes, it's all the
it's all the same. So there he is, doing the
First
dishes.
the Dhamma, then the dishes.
The first noble truth that dukkha occurs describes everything in the world, including situations that will arise that we'll find unpleasant. And it is okay to walk away from them. In fact, it's kind of a prerequisite. The Buddha,
Because it's idle chatter, I mean.
it can be all those things. It could be idle chatter, it could be gossip, it could be wrong action, it could be all kinds of things. The Dhamma says that we should walk away from them. We're not here to solve the ills of the world and often through staying in something, we're giving tacit approval to what's occurring just by our own presence there. And simply walking away is at least preserving our own equanimity, our own calm and peaceful mind, and maybe it's contributing to other people who might think a little bit about, why am I not being supported in this deluded activity, if that's what it is. The Buddha left the palace grounds and stayed away from the palace. He could have awakened and gone back, but he saw the world that way as a confining place. And in order to maintain, and we talked about this a little bit on Thursday night, to nurture his own awakening, he kept himself, as much as it was practical, removed from the world around him. But he didn't live as a hermit either, did he? Every day he got up off his cushion, walked into town, got his bowl of food, interacted with people. And many of the stories, the suttas, are based on his interaction outside of the Sangha. The great majority of them are inside the Sangha, and he interacted with leaders all the time. Some of the greatest suttas are when the Buddha was outside of the Sanghas and when he was interacting with the world. When he ran into Bahia, or I can't think of the guy's name now, the murderer.
Yeah, sounds like Angela Merkel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how can I forget?
Merkel.
No, it's Angela Miller.
Yeah.
Angela Miller. So it's the point of all that is it's okay to say that this situation is inherently hurtful, inherently unskillful. Let me get out of it. Let me practice restraint.
Even if it's just being inherently hurtful to yourself.
Yes, and there's some situations which is kind of what we're talking about, that will be in family situations that can sometimes be very stressful. And that's a necessary part of life, isn't it? It doesn't mean that just because we know something is going to be stressful, but not necessarily directly hurtful, that we simply participate in it because it's the right thing to do. But we might leave a little early, you know. No, I mean, I learned a long time ago, 1981, that one of the best ways for me to maintain my sobriety, and this is when it was really shaky, that if I have to be in situations where people are drinking or drugging, to go late and leave early. It's okay to do that. In other large group situations, it's okay to apply the same thing. We don't have to be there for everything. We don't have to submit to a lot of stressful situations. But
that's a hard balance, though.
It is.
Because sometimes you do want to do social justice. I mean, sometimes, like last week, I just was on my newsfeed. I read an article about, how Fox, thinks that the investigation should end, and this is nonsense. And I just felt the need to just join Fox and put my opinion up there. And I walked away and said, all right, I couldn't care less if 100 people start attacking me. I'm letting it be known how I feel. Yeah. I mean, I think that's important too sometimes.
Oh, I think it is too. One of the, an aspect of right speech and right action is to understand, and sometimes it's not clear, but to understand that if my action is likely to fall on deaf ears or to have no useful effect, that's idle chatter or idle action. And you practice restraint, you don't do it just because it's a waste of energy. And I'm not saying that particular one, but that's where the wisdom comes in, the understanding. And that's when we stop what's that old saying? That's when we stop tilting at windmills. We understand that there's nothing good, even though my intentions might be completely pure. Wisdom tells me that it's not going to have any useful effect. So you don't do it. I think that every person in the world, if they would just meditate and develop the Eightfold Path, all the problems would be solved. The only time I talk about it is in here.
Yeah, right.
Because this is where people will listen. They're not going to listen out there.
Yeah.
And so, and in that way, if I was to do that, I might be turning people off to at some point. Look at that crazy guy. I don't want anything to do with Buddhism.
My husband has a really funny saying. He says, don't try to teach a pig to sing because it wastes your time and it annoys the
It annoys the pig. That's it. Yeah, that's a perfect thing on idle chatter and idle action. If it's likely to fall on, and it develops really nicely on retreat, doesn't it? The idea that because we're then mindful of what I'm saying, is it really useful and necessary, or is it just idle chatter?
Everything's clear.
I find that when I talk about this, it's like talking about my art. I usually say, people will say, well, what is it exactly that you do? And I'll say 2 or 3 sentences and see how that sits.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're interested, I'll say a little bit more.
Yeah.
And if they're really interested, I'll talk until their eyes close. And sometimes that happens with the first sentence. And sometimes it never happens, and sometimes it happens in the middle. But sometimes I find when I talk about this, I get partway into it, and the words even start sounding less important to me.
Yeah.
The importance of what we're doing here is, this is the best thing I've ever done for myself. But when you start to explain things without the context of the lessons and the articles and stuff, it starts to lose its.
Does it sound more forced? Like you're
No, it
trying harder
just
to make
it just doesn't really make sense.
You know why? Because it doesn't have the context, and the context can only be experienced.
Yeah.
So people ask me, not that it happens often, but when they ask me, what do you do? I do a lot of things. I usually start with, I take my dog for a walk. If they're still, I say, well, I teach and write about meditation and mindfulness. And if they're interested, I'll explain it more. But often I get, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I can't explain it any more meaningful than to say, if you're really interested, Tuesday at 7:15, Thursday at Saturday at 8:30, because you can't really explain it. You can say, well, it's changed my life in very meaningful ways. If you'd like to try it here, this is how you do it. Again, so personally,
It starts sounding too flowery, right?
Flowery or unrealistic, or and really depending on, because one time I was trying to explain to someone what I do as an artist, and they said, okay, I get that, but what do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do? Like when you wake up in the morning, what do you do?
What they're really asking is, what is your value in the world?
That's right. And they're asking me,
What is your
do you really think that's important? Or, they're asking me to qualify what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you start to discuss this, sometimes people are so detached from anything to do with self-work or introspection that, I've had people say, oh my God, that sounds like a lot of work. Yeah. But,
But it's
you're
meaningful.
working on this skillfully, or you're working on other things unskillfully.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, I know I'll be better off if you're working on all those, negative thinking and all of that. That's what your inner workings are. Then I would guess that I'll probably end up in a better place than you will.
Yeah, and
not in judgment, but just
you can't explain
what
it.
you choose to do.
Yeah, you can't explain it that way, because because most people are stuck in their own views and they put themselves in your place, and they can't appreciate that the end result of what you do is bringing beautiful experiences into the world for other people to enjoy. And they can't relate that because they can't see themselves in it. That's another problem of self-referential views. We're cut off from even someone trying to explain something to us because we can't see ourselves doing it. Yeah, thank you. Lorna, good to see you this morning.
Thank you, good to be here. Well, I've sat through or listened to all of these talks on this sutta. And from the beginning to the end, I have a much greater appreciation of how we reference ourselves from the outside world. And you can relate that to trees or your garden or your house, or even in the most stupidest things, it makes it even clear, like your countertop, you know, that how you feel about your countertop, you know, you reference yourself from that.
Yeah.
And I have a much greater appreciation of that, and how the Buddha wishes us to. I'm a little bit hazy about joining with the body, because that says we're not the body, but how our minds have to be located in our body and not be reference yourself from your environment.
Yeah.
And I have a much greater appreciation of that. As I said, I'm a little bit hazy about the body now, because as I thought, the body isn't us. We are not our bodies, and as Matt describes it, our bodies come through our mothers, and we just end up with this one. I've got this one.
Yeah.
I don't really have much to do with it. I've got this one. And it's not really part of me in that sense. So the references to your thoughts coming into your body have just got a little bit fuzzy there.
So I don't mean to interrupt you, and please continue after I finish this. The point isn't to personalize the body as this is me, because with an understanding of impermanence, this body is as impermanent as everything else. But as a point of mindful focus, uniting my mind with my body is putting myself in my life as my life occurs. But there's no other specialness to the body. And so whether my body is this way or that way doesn't matter. But it's important to be here with what's occurring. Yes, this is something that's hard for a mind rooted in ignorance to even conceive of. But think about this. Where's your thought process occurring? It's not outside in a very practical way. It's occurring right here. And so mind is a rather amorphous thing because we can't point to a part of the body where the mind is. But why do we have to? Thinking is occurring within this body. So if I want to be present with my life as my life occurs, I have to be where that's occurring, isn't it? Which is right here. But there's no other specialness around the body. But it is. I remember talking about this, probably not the last retreat, but the retreat before. When we really understand the process of being awakened, and we've let go of all self-referential views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, then the mind in the body is simply a reference for what's occurring in life. But there's no specialness to it, because there's nothing special that's occurring. And so what's the most important thing for me to do in my life, because there's nothing special going on? Because there's nothing special to attach myself to? Is to be meaningfully present for my life. To have a mind of peace and calm. Steady and continuous, like the Buddha said. To some people, especially those that are still caught up in the self achieving something, that sounds like the most bland way of living your life. I got to be doing something. I got to achieve something. What about achieving a mind of lasting peace and happiness? Here's how you do it. You can do it in 7 years or 6 or 5 or 4.
2 weeks.
And if that's not what you want, if you don't want a mind of lasting peace and happiness, you can do anything else you want. You don't have to take to the Dhamma in joyful engagement. You can continue doing whatever you're doing. Nobody ever said that you have to do this. But if you want a mind of lasting peace and happiness, you will. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
And then my own personal practice, Tom needed to go over to Scotland for family reasons last week, which is and while he was away for about 6 days, 5-6 days. And so I thought this is the perfect time for me to have my own personal retreat. Right? So I was going to wake up, meditate, and eat, and listen to a talk, and meditate, and eat, and listen to a talk, and meditate, and then go to bed. And that's what I was going to do for 5 or 6 days. But, well, I didn't. So I thought I'd sort of rather miss the opportunity sort of to really engage and quiet my mind as much as I thought I would do, because other things came every day, things to do, and it's just not kind of like that when you're at home. So I think I set the bar very high for myself over the time when Tom was away. I was going to really work it like a retreat. So that was the bar set high, and I failed. And then I didn't meet that high bar, so I thought I'd failed. But what I realized when Tom returned, that my mind really had quieted down. Mm-hmm. And as Tom returned, I had to pick him up from the airport, and that's a very busy place. And we got back at 9 o'clock at night, sort of from the flight and all that sort of stuff. And then there's coming home, the suitcase, and then sort of life picks up again, to my normal kind of. And although when Tom was away, I thought I hadn't done very well on my sort of solo retreat, when life kicked in and got back to normal, I realized when he was away, it really did quieten down. I could feel the difference of having a quiet life, guarding your sense gates and all that sort of stuff as best you can, and then just thrown into life again. I mean, the difference was really quite remarkable, and I could see it and feel it in my body. You just feel it. So that was it. That's my little contribution to the Dhamma this week.
Thank you.
Except to say, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Whatever is appropriate to have.
Yeah. Merry Christmas is fine with me, even though I'm a Buddhist. It's still Christmas. It's very, very difficult. One of the reasons why we go up to Hudson, New York for retreat rather than a local place is that people would stay home and come during the day. And there's just too many distractions. It's just the way it is. So you didn't fail. It was great, a great intention to do it, and you did the best you could. And you recognize the deepening and calming of your mind. It's so important to see that. So
when you do it in a group.
Yeah, it really is. Okay. I'll get the retreat registration up probably next week. The schedule is going to change. We're going to have more of the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati Sutta, but we're still going to do the basic, the Nagara Sutta, and just to lay out the context, dependent origination, etc., will be part of the retreat. January 2nd, we're going to start the Truth of Happiness course again for about 12 weeks. But I'm going to do it on all three. The same class will be on all 3 days, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. In other words, we'll start with the first week. All 3 classes will be on that. I think that's the only announcement I had. Oh, next week. And it's a busy week for everyone, but please come to class next week because we're going to finish out the year with a bang. The classes are going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to give any specific teaching, but what I'd like to do is everyone who wants to, nobody has to do this, to speak for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes about what they're learning and how they're integrating the Eightfold Path, and to ask any specific question at that time. So we're going to do that at all 3 classes next week. I think that's a nice way to just end the year. So, but we'll meditate too. Okay, let's finish with metta as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Merry Christmas. Peace. We can leave the